climbing the corridors of power, city government, and now he's a federal politician. This guy is not interested in hearing that his entire professional life he's been not only wasting his time, but negatively impacting the world in aggregate. He's just not interested in critically analyzing those basic philosophical presumptions. And it makes sense because you think about it, he says, look at my life. Look at the types of people that consult me on decisions. Look at the social circles that I run around in. Look at the command I have over resources, over people. All the signals are telling me that that what I am doing is critical to the proper functioning of the world, and you will not convince him otherwise. So, if you have that type of philosophy, if you say that government can be a force for good, how do you deal with this problem of war? You don't like war either. You want war to end. Well, how do you diagnose war? When you look at the problem, when you look at war, you don't say it's caused by concentrations of power. You say it's caused by competing powers. Think of a politician. Every politician tells themselves, if only I had complete power, I would be benevolent. The only reason I resort to these dastardly deeds is because I have to do it to maintain my power, because there are always people trying to snipe and claim it. And so when they say war, it's the same dynamic. There are competing powers, both wanting to conquer. So the solution to war in their mind is create one hegemonic power, create one government that can arbitrate any disputes that might come up between nation states. There wouldn't even be nation states, and then you will never have a war, and then we will, and in their utopic future, and the danger of this idea is you can see the appeal of it. You can see how that makes a lot of sense, because it will end war in a certain respect. And in this imagined future, this government has all the means of force. Everyone else is completely disarmed, and this is going to be their idea of this utopia where the government is benevolent because there's no threats to it. Now, we who study government, we understand the dynamics. We understand government is based on coercion. Government is based on threats. You can't create something good out of that. It's the means. The ends are never justified by those means. We understand what would happen if you create a world government. No matter what protections they put in place, no matter what rights they say it's going to protect, no matter what checks and balances they say, it's not going to stick to it. And maybe at first it's fine, but over the course of a couple generations, it's going to become more despotic. It's going to become arbitrary. It's going to become more detached from the will of what the people want, less concerned about what the people want, and you're going to create a situation where there's no escape. There won't be a Russia for Edward Snowden to run to. There won't be an Ecuador for Julian Assange to hide in. There will be no competing. The only real good thing about war is the fact that it cleans out old governments. If a government is despotic, it causes poverty in its people, and a stronger government that gives more liberty will clean it out. That's the only good thing about war, and that's the one thing that they're going to take away. And so you'll create a situation where our descendants will grow up in a world of poverty, ignorance, without hope, and it's a very scary proposition because there will be no way to get out of it. If this theory is wrong, which I think it is, there will be no way for people to organize a resistance to end it. So I'm just trying to emphasize, the stakes are high at this point. We are at a unique point in history where it is theoretically possible. It's a very unipolar world. It is theoretically possible that the U.S. and its allies could conquer the world. I mean, now it doesn't have to be a military conquest. Originally it might be a confederation, just like the U.S. started as a confederation. But the point is, it's a critical time. So, I would emphasize just to start thinking about this stuff, and if it makes sense to you, then start fighting they'll redouble your efforts fighting for liberty and support what we're doing with the church, because this is part of what we're trying to promote, a different idea. And one more thing I just point out, which I've made this argument to a couple of you already. To be philosophically consistent, you are either an anarchist or you're for world government. To be philosophically consistent on your political views. If you think government has a legitimate role, any kind of legitimate role. I mean, there are two forces that have existed throughout history. There's anarchy and there's government. And these have gone back and forth. When governments get too despotic, anarchy allows another government to conquer them. So, but if you believe government should do something, let's say you think a proper role of government is, labor protections, well, you should hate the current international system because it's anarchic, which means that a manufacturer who doesn't want to deal with the U.S. labor laws can run away and set up shop in Malaysia or Africa or whatever. So, if you think government has a legitimate role in protecting labor, you should want a world government. Or if you, let's say you think that government has a proper role in redistributing wealth, well, you should hate the international system because it frustrates that. Because if taxes get too high, the wealthy can relocate to the Cayman Islands or whatever. And so you should want then a world government. And it goes, even if you say that the government has a role in defending, which, to put it in a different way, what you're saying is, it's okay for you to force me to pay for defense that you think I should have. If you think that's a legitimate role of government, which most people do, even libertarians think that the international system of anarchy at times frustrates that, because if the government's too weak, another government can conquer it, and that government will then fail to defend, do its proper role of defending. So that you would also want a world government. The inverse goes for anarchy. If you don't think the federal government has a role, then the state government doesn't, the city government doesn't either. So, to be consistent, you've got to go with one or the other extreme. Justin has raised this point that that's not really true, because maybe you have a theory that governments exist to defend races or nations. And I guess I can see that, but I don't think that goes to the same level from a fundamental level of theory of government. Anyway, so that's what I have, and I guess, what do we have now? Petitions. So Gavin.
Thanks, Steve. We're calling this petitions as part of the service now. It's generally just a forum for people to get arguments or occurrences, things that happen to them, things that they might want support on, or that they want people to know. In a traditional church, you have analogies to this where people maybe just make announcements about their family, or so it's still informative, but it's anything. One thing I wanted to mention was I recently came across, this is a little different than what we've used before, but I recently came across a similar organization to this in New Hampshire. And I just heard about it in passing. There's not a lot of information available, and I don't know how true it is, but what I heard was that this group has actually formed a church that, and one of the things they've done is they've provided opportunities for community service that's geared specifically towards liberty activists that are arrested, and they have that option, as part of their, that they get that option in court. And so I've tried to find out more, but I just wanted to mention that as something that, at some point, something that could be provided by this group. The way I envision that is they're coming up with opportunities for community service that are compatible, which
share something. So it's not really related to liberty, but the organization I work for, Green America, is hosting a Green Festival in September 21st and 22nd, and it's the idea of advancing a green economy. So there's lots of workshops and exhibitors and speakers, and some of it has to do with like urban homesteading or how to fix your own bikes and things like that. If any of you guys want to go to the Green Festival, I can give you free tickets.
Maybe we should, set up a booth for Church of Coxiology.
Yeah.
Because we're all about green. There's a whole theory about the economy in an anarchist society. Is that an option?
Yeah, I can. There's special nonprofit booth rates that I can find out for you.
Well,
Is it in DC?
Yeah, it's at the convention center.
It's annual.
Yeah. The 21st and 22nd of September.
okay.
Anyone else?
I'll say something.
Okay.
Bradley Manning, which he's now appealing. No, he's not Chelsea Manning, but he's appealing for a pardon to Obama. And I just want to say that if he gets a pardon, like in no way should we be grateful to Obama, because it's like saying you don't have the right to put him in jail in the first place. And then all of a sudden now you're going to pretend to be benevolent and say, well, okay, I'll let him go. And like, no, he doesn't get applause for that. I just wanted to, because I know that if something happens or commutes a sentence, then everyone's going to say like, what a great guy Obama is. And it's like, you created that situation and now you're, just a thought I had.
Well, he didn't create the situation.
Obama?
Well,
yeah, but he doesn't have to be president.
Right, yeah, but I mean, the president's good. I mean, that's the expected.
But it is literally a petition because it's a petition on the White House website, for clemency, if anybody wants to sign it.
Yeah, maybe you get assignment,
Have they reached the requirement?
I looked at it this morning in the wee hours, and I'm sure it's not at the required number, but it's actually in the White House Gov petitions. There is one for Bradley Manning's clemency.
So what would it be? I mean, would it be a complete release or like a certain of that?
I signed it and didn't really read it.
35 years.
Yeah. What are they charging? 35 years is what you're sentenced to?
Yeah. The pardon would be, that's the only thing this person can do.
And who's behind the petition?
I don't, but I'll.
Anyone can start.
It's just some Bradley Manning supporters started it.
Yeah,
It's
you
not,
get 25,000.
the White House didn't start it.
Yeah.
You get 25,000 signatures, they have to respond to it.
I thought it was 100,
Or maybe
but it's a certain.
Yeah, something like that.
They raised it.
Oh, yeah.
They gotta respond to it today.
I guess to rephrase what Steve means then is that if Obama does pardon him, it's kind of like we would expect him to do that, right? So if you do something you're expected to do, you don't always you shouldn't give an applause for something you expect him to do. Versus if you don't do it, then you should shut it.
Or a situation you contribute to.
Yeah, I mean, the position is don't be involved in this criminal organization, U.S. government, like don't even be there.
Yeah.
And
Well,
if you're there, then don't be as fast to be like, oh, you went to, I think it's just.
I think Steve's taking a really hard line, which I don't disagree with, but it is a really hard line because it's, the more general case is, so we have Eric Holder talking about how, well, we should look into not having mandatory sentences, but they're all free at any moment to pardon vast numbers of people who are just in jail for possessing drugs. They could do that anytime,
It's like you're.
as opposed to talking.
Your organization is doing this as you speak out one side of your mouth, You're
Right.
putting people in jail and prosecuting them out the other side.
Right, although they didn't start it, it's been going on for a long time, so. It's just that they talked about it, but they could actually do something about it if they wanted to.
Justin?
All right. So my talk is on libertarian populism and cosmopolitanism. I chose this for two reasons. One, it's been an ongoing debate in newspapers and blogosphere, and also because it complements Steve's talk. So let me explain what these two ideas are, generally speaking. For example, populism is generally the notion of the people versus the power elites. And it usually has more socialist origins of, the People's Party. But obviously it's taking a new rebirth in more of a liberty-oriented flavor. And then generally cosmopolitanism is in some ways the opposite of that. It's the idea of being a world citizen, and that everyone has the same amount of rights, or that you shouldn't be just focused on local interests, that you should be a world citizen. So cosmopolitanism generally is associated actually by people who promote a one world government for the reasons Steve was kind of talking about. If you want labor regulation, then you want it to be everywhere, not just within your own country. If you want environmentalism, you want it everywhere. And so there's a logical consistency to that. So the problem with cosmopolitanism traditionally, though, is it often confuses society with the government. Right? You can be a citizen of the world and appreciate all the different cultures and everything without supporting world government, right? So I think separating that notion of society and government and really making the case for libertarian cosmopolitanism is what I'm going to try to convince you of, that understanding that if to be principled in our ideas and understanding what human rights are, that they do apply equally to all people across the world. So in libertarian populism, it's been picking up partly with the utter failure of the GOP to pick up any momentum. Sure, the Tea Party is kind of the original resurgence of populism in the right. And so some people have been elected, on that basis, but at the national level, it certainly hasn't had much effect. But clearly with Romney's approach of saying it's the 47% moochers and all that kind of thing, that just doesn't fly with the changing demographics of America, and most people associate as being part of your average American, and not as this business elite who feels oppressed by the government, which is kind of like the GOP line, right? We want to cater to this demographic, and we're trying to promote the American dream because we think that everyone, even if they don't achieve it, wants to believe in it and that they can get there someday. So I don't want taxes on the rich. I might not be rich today, but someday I might be rich, and so therefore I don't want to be taxed a lot, right? That's kind of like the sales pitch of GOP currently. So they're trying to rebrand this idea of politics, or this sort of politics, and showing how we're not going to be catering to the rich. We're showing how big government hurts your average person, the poor and middle class are oppressed. And the way that they show this is through examples of cronyism, regulation, Wall Street bailouts, stuff like that. Corporations who have, regulations that help their special interests and hurt everyone else. And so these are economic interests generally that appeal to this crowd, partly because a lot of these people are generally social conservatives, right? So it's selling just one half of libertarianism, that is more laissez-faire economy. And so we would applaud that part, but I'm trying to say that it's kind of like two cheers for libertarian populism. Like we should be actually broadening our scope of who we're targeting to and changing the message. So the platform for libertarian populism is generally, there's a few big proponents out there like I think Tim Carney from the Washington Examiner. And so the platform is, lower taxes, less regulation, because regulations hurt small business guys and your mom and pop, people, self-employed people. And if they mention at all things like immigration or foreign policy, it's usually only in economic terms. I think it's like $700 or something. $700 billion or $1 trillion we spent on Iraq war. Think of all the money we could have saved if we didn't go to war with Iraq. And that really ignores the human costs and really the injustice of war. Not that the economic impacts of war aren't important or significant, but it's a branding issue. If you're trying to target, especially people who have, bleeding heart tendencies, and I don't mean that pejoratively necessarily, that that they might be more concerned about the more cosmopolitan aspects of that. So, like I said, it's kind of two cheers for the populism argument. But I think that, again, if we're making the principled argument that if rights are a human right, if human rights are truly a right, then they are universal in their application. And so they should apply to everyone beyond borders. And so here's an example of libertarian populism that really struck me is Rand Paul's filibuster. He's out there talking about the use of drones, and he admits that he's not against the use of drones outright. He just wants to make sure that they're not used on U.S. soil. He's not out there, maybe he paid a little bit of lip service to it within his, big filibuster about collateral damage. But he wasn't saying that I oppose drones because they inherently kill innocent people. He just wants to make sure they're not used on U.S. soil. And to me, that's kind of troubling. If that's actually buying into the system or conceding more than we should. I think if you're trying to make a principled argument for rights and justice, that you should be arguing against their use because of collateral damage. So another thing is immigration. So a lot of the target demographic for people who they're trying to sell libertarian populism to, they ignore immigration because a lot of those conservative-leaning people oppose immigration for various reasons, which I think are inherently racist. And if they try to sell it at all, it's usually as an economic argument that by allowing entrepreneurs in, they'll help the economy, we need more skilled labor. And if we let any of the less skilled labor in at all, it won't be that harmful. They're trying to make an economic argument for it, but it should be fundamentally a human right for a person to accept employment across borders and relocate. To deny that is, one, a huge burden on the people who are poor in other countries. And that would be the greatest opportunity for economic advancement. If you are in Senegal or Haiti, rather than trying to send foreign aid to someone over there, it's much more efficient for everyone involved. And not just, I'm using economic terms, but I mean it actually from a moral point, for that person to allow that person to relocate and live where they want to, and take a new life in a country that has better political institutions and safer environment to start a business. So really it comes down to a moral argument for open borders versus just it'll grow the economy. So I think that both those arguments should be used. I'm concerned the libertarian populism is underselling itself by focusing on the economic arguments. So again, the Achilles heel is that it doesn't focus on the human rights, and that, again, if rights truly are rights, they're universal. And so we should be making these arguments from a principled basis, put forth the theory of rights, and show how these rights apply just as much to someone outside our national borders as they would inside the borders. So, like Steve kind of talked about, there's, you could be for pure cosmopolitanism in political sense, it would be a one world government, or pure anarchy, or the third alternative would be a national, like a democracy, national democracy, which is actually what most people subscribe to. And I think that partly because the other two alternatives sort of seem too radical. World government or total anarchy, most people think, well, the most pragmatic and intuitive alternative would be a national democracy. But then you run into contradictions of again, like if something really is a right, if healthcare is a right, then it should apply to someone outside the borders just as well. And so how can you justify not using the apparatus to ensure those rights to everyone? And so then that's why you have to challenge your theory of rights and what qualifies as a right. So that's where we need to move the debate, I think. So I hope I made a good case for libertarian cosmopolitanism and an understanding that if a right truly is a right, it applies beyond the border. Now we can make an argument that, Gavin, I know him fairly well, and I can be concerned about his well-being more than a total stranger because we're friends. So you can make the argument for family, friends, kind of a community, which is what we're trying to build here, right? That you inherently care more about the people you know. That's understandable, that's logical. But to take the national democracy model, I think is unintuitive to me because there's no reason you should care more about a person just because they're within your arbitrary regional borders if they're a complete stranger. Just because you speak the same language or have some sort of really distant connection which you've never met before. That just doesn't make sense to me. Why should I care about a stranger in Nebraska that I've never met, obviously, over a stranger in Shanghai? So that's why I think the national model, national democracy model, and totally implodes for that reason and other reasons that relate to what democracy is. But again, you have to bring it back to a theory of rights and being consistent in its application. And so, yes.
So I was just curious, how come, obviously this is such an intuitive case, and I think a lot of people, hopefully would agree with what you're saying.
That's a good point. There's a good blog called Bleeding Heart Libertarians,
Yeah.
and they field, I would say, a range of viewpoints that kind of fall